is Omnivoracious, the Amazon Books blog, and we're here with Gregory Maguire, the author of Out of Oz, the final volume in the Wicked series. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you were writing a long time before Wicked became the sensation it was, right? Did you have any idea that the series could blow up the way that it did?
Well, for one thing, I didn't know it was going to be a series when I wrote Wicked. Wicked was what the English call a standalone novel, a one-off. After all, any book in which the main character dies in the last page doesn't automatically presume a sequel. But then when the idea of a sequel came along, it was partly because the book, having flown under the radar for a long time, began to fly, into view, and I was just having more and more readers who were writing to me, not about the book, but about what had happened to the characters after they finished the last page. So the readers themselves really prompted me to go back to the corrupt land of Oz and find myself at home there.
Well, that answers my second question, which was it always destined to be a four-part trilogy?
Well, no, even that was not true. Wicked is a tragedy, and the Wicked Witch of the West dies at the end. I hope readers feel sad at the end. That's the intention. But the second book, Son of a Witch, was intended to be, as they would call it, Shakespearean comedy, in that it ends with new life. It ends with a young man having found himself and having given birth to a daughter. So I thought that's a good place to begin. The life cycle renews. We don't need to go over it over and over and over again. But there it is. But even at that point, I was getting so many letters from readers saying, "Well, what happened to the little green-skinned baby born in the last sentence of Son of a Witch? You can't just leave us here. You have a moral obligation to your readers to help us not have such sleepless nights."
So what was the first kernel for the very first book? Like, were you watching Wizard of Oz, or were you just walking down the street, or how did it come to you? How did you decide to write this book?
All the backstory for how I wrote the book happened in childhood. My parents were very strict and did not let us watch much TV at all, especially movies on TV. They were very scornful of. But once a year they relented, and they let us watch The Wizard of Oz, starring Margaret Hamilton and some child star wannabe. I don't know what happened to her. And because it was an annual viewing event when I was a kid, it wasn't 24/7, you can see anything whenever you want, it began to be slotted into our sort of liturgical calendar. There was Christmas, there was Easter, there was The Wizard of Oz. It was an event in the year. The way when one approaches a story over and over and over again and hears it over and over again, one applies different frames of reference and standards to what the story means as one gets older. So by the time I got to be in my early 30s and the idea to write about evil finally occurred to me, there was The Wizard of Oz as part of my childhood education, just ripe for the taking.
Well, it's interesting. You have been writing for many years. I mean, many years before Wicked came out. And you've written lots of different genres: picture books, children's books,
right,
science fiction, I think.
Right.
Do you have a favorite genre?
I love writing fantasy because the reviews of fantasy, while they can be very strict, nonetheless are not likely to say you did inaccurate or insufficient research. If you are going to write fantasy, you have to work very, very hard to construct all the rules of a universe. Indeed, I feel more an anthropologist than a novelist in some ways, having to know everything that I need to know about Oz. But the one comfort in it, as opposed to, say, writing about 17th century, France or something, is that there is no critic in the world who can say, you got that wrong. They really didn't have horses and carriages in the north of Oz, 400 years before the arrival of the wizard.
How has the success of the trilogy changed the way you write? Has it changed your writing at all?
It hasn't changed the way that I write. I write the way that I taught myself to write when I was in 3rd grade, which is not to start a story until I know the first sentence, and not to stop writing until I get to the last line. I have never tried to write in patchwork the way many wonderful writers do, where a scene will come to them and part of the fun for them will be rearranging the puzzle pieces to make the most beautiful and elegant design. that has the most moral meaning. I still write like a kid. I wait until I have the first sentence, and then I write, very often by hand, all the way through to the last sentence of the book.
I saw, I think it was in another interview you did, actually. You said you compared writing, you said you start out with sort of a hazy image, is that right? So do you remember saying this? Or I thought it was kind of fascinating. It was a few years ago, I think, when I read it.
I don't remember saying it, but it sounds like something I would have said because most of my life is pretty hazy.
All right, well.
but in fact, it's true that there is something about a visual pull, an image that you don't understand, and so you have to write about in order to find out about it. C.S. Lewis famously said that he got the whole idea for the Narnia Chronicles through a dream of seeing a faun, that is a kind of a goat man like Pan, walking through a snowy woods, carrying a bundle of Christmas presents. And he woke up, and that was the beginning of Narnia. It was just an image that he followed. Didn't have any Aslan in it, didn't have any of the other stuff. There were some things about the Wicked Years series. I remember once thinking about, say, how much I could make up. For instance, I was thinking about the Wicked Witch of the East. Remember the one whose feet stick out like this, and the house falls on her feet. And I thought, well, what do we know about her, really? All we know about her is that she had feet. There's nothing else. And then I started laughing, thinking, she could have been as large as a house. I mean, she could have been enormous. She could have been a fat witch, but nobody knows. Therefore, all the world is open to me because of all the information that's not known. And that very image of the house having come down and squished a witch without my knowing what the rest of her looked like was an image that pulled me to write about it.
So you didn't find it limiting writing about a world that was already created? You could just sort of go off any way you wanted?
I found it daunting, but not limiting. I knew that there would be people, if they ever bothered to read me, who would call me a heretic, and they did. In fact, some of the early reviewers thought that I was arrogant and I was playing around with material that was too sacred for someone the likes of me to mess about with. But I didn't care. I wasn't writing for them. I was writing for people who wanted to read it.
Were you surprised when this sort of groundswell grew up around the book? When people love your books, like love them. Is it a surprise to you? Is it?
It's completely a surprise because one of the things that I try to do with those books is to create novels that are a little bit more 19th century than 20th century. They follow certain tropes and directions that 19th century novels do. They're very thick with plot, they're thick with character who come in and out like a soap opera over hundreds of pages. There's lots of descriptions, and there's a lot that I don't say in the way that 19th century books don't say a whole lot about sex, they just imply it. There's a lot that I don't say. So I thought my books might appeal to about 12 people, but the 12 people would really like them. And then I would go on living in my cold water, fourth floor, walk up, and that would be a very satisfying life as an artist for me.
And now there's a Broadway play that's basically playing in every city in the United States, it seems like. What's that been like?
Well, the Broadway play, yes, I think it's playing in nine places around the globe every night, except for the nights that it's off. And mercifully, I think I would have mental collapse with the weight of knowing how many millions of people have already seen that play. But just about the time that, a little bit after Wicked got published, I began to adopt children. And so I have 3 school-age children at home, and they don't give a fig about what is happening in the West End of London or what's happening in Tokyo or Sydney. If there aren't enough Cheerios on the table in the morning, somebody's got to answer for it. And so I think the fact of having taken on those adopted children to raise at just the time that my career was changing, in many ways, I think saved me from becoming even more of an egomaniac than I already am.
What's the best part about being a world-famous author?
Well, I'm going to change your question for you, if I may. I'm going to say the best part about being me as a world-famous author is that the Wicked Witch of the West will always be more recognizable than I am. I have a very anodyne, oh, it's just that guy sitting next to me in the airplane kind of face. I can hide behind the skirts of the Wicked Witch of the West, who, with her green skin, always draws attention in a crowd. I am very happy for the attention to my books, but I'm equally happy that I can kind of continue to slide through the crowds in the holiday malls and get by.
You do a lot of work for children's literacy. If you were in charge of the country, something, what more would you do for children's literacy?
One of the great accomplishments in this country, when there's so much not to be happy about, one of the great accomplishments in this country is how public libraries continue to stand up for the rights of all their citizens in their districts to read, to have access to books, and to have that access be unmonitored by any supervisors. So I would do anything that I could to continue to support the public libraries. I think that they really are part of the glue of democracy because they provide access to education for everyone regardless of money or schooling or status. And so I would rush to the public libraries, tomorrow, where I nominated King of the Forest.
What's next for you?
I am being honest when I say I'm not really sure. I've been a published novelist for children or for adults for 32 years. And friends of mine who are teachers or librarians or in the banking industry or insurance say, we're retiring after 32 years. That's a standard period of time in which to work. I don't feel like I want to retire, but I do feel the 32-year itch, maybe to do something else, the encore career. Frankly, I wouldn't mind trying my hand at a stage play because I've had so much fun watching Wicked 47 and a half times and learning a lot about how plays are done.
One last question. So what was your involvement in the Wicked play? I actually don't know.
Yeah, when the idea for a play came up, and I had full control over any kind of contract I wanted to sign because it was only my decision whether or not to sell the rights, I remembered that L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz, and Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch of the West, didn't come up out of the grave to haunt me and say, you can't play with this material the way you're going to. I felt that I really should give the same kind of freedom and liberty to the people who are going to make the play. So I said to them, as long as I believe that you know the themes of the book, then you can do what you want, and I'm not going to sit on your shoulders and complain. Make the best play you can. I've already done my work. Because I think it's a good play, I end up being delighted, and I can say, oh yes, it's a play based on my book. But if it had been a lousy play, I could have said, well, of course, I didn't have much to do with it.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us. It's really been a pleasure.
Great.
And wish you the greatest success in the world in your next endeavor.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks.